We're back with another Bitwig Studio tutorial, and in this video we're going to be dissecting the new TreeMonster device, which is described on the website as an organic zero-crossing amplitude-controlled ring modulator with a life of its own. So in the first half of the video we're going to be doing the technical, what is this, how is it working, and probably most specifically, how does it differ from just your basic ring modulator, because Bitwig already has a very powerful ring mod effect device built into it. And then the second half of the video, we'll get into more of like a practical example. I'm not really sure how practical it's going to be, but this is definitely one of those effects that you just kind of have to experiment with on your own and kind of find a cool setting. Knowing how this is working, it will be useful, but it's certainly not required to use this and get really cool results with it. But hopefully, by gaining the knowledge of how it's working, it might allow you to then know situations where you want to draw to it and bring it in. Let's begin by reviewing ring modulation. Ring modulation is a sum and difference formula. So you have a destination pitch, and in this example, that destination pitch is 220. So it's just a note A, and I'm playing the same note over and over again. We then set a source, which is going to be clocking at a different frequency. And in this example, we're just using sine waves, but you can certainly use more than sine waves, and I encourage that you do it. That's where you really get interesting results, but just to show you what's going on. So I have a test tone that's going to act as the source, and in this case, we're at 220. So if I apply this 220 hertz onto this 220 hertz onto the destination, what we're going to get is a sum and difference. So instead of 220, we get 440 and we would get 0. And so you'll see as I bring the mix in, we'll start with a balance, and eventually when I hit it to be 100%, that's exactly what's going to happen here. So I turn the ring modulator on. We can see we're starting to get that new peak at 440, and also it's trying to do it at 0. And that causes some problems. So you do have to be really careful about that source destination relationship. And obviously, normally pitch is going to be jumping around. Okay. So in this example here, what we have is the sound is, and I'll just loop it quickly, is that we start at 220. We go up to 440. We then go up to 880. We come back to 440. Okay, so in this example, things are going to be a little bit different. So at 440 plus or minus 220, which is what's coming in, we'll see something pop up at 660, and we'll see something pop up at 220. So for the first note, when it's doing it like on itself, there's going to be some problems, right? We're going to be trying to create a bump there, a new frequency at 0, which really wouldn't work in practical terms. But for all the other notes, it will work just fine. So let's just go ahead and do that here. Always keeping 220 as the difference if I bring it back. Right, this is just scaled, but if we were to look at these, it's always 220. So in this example, what I'd have to do, and why this ring modulator is very useful, is that first of all, I could go into the source destination. I could do things like add a distortion, make this more interesting. But then I could also go into my post effects and add something like a high pass filter just to keep things safe. So I'll pause the video and we'll look at that just so you can see it. All right, so just to show you how this can get a lot more interesting, we have the destination as just a sine wave, and the source is beginning as just a sine wave. It's the test tone, of course, but we can go and we can bring in our distortion. And one thing that's pretty neat about this is if you ever wanted to see how exactly this distortion is adding additional harmonics, you can actually get way in here and kind of look and see exactly where it's bringing these in, what the symmetry control is actually doing, and then also what slew does. Once we start to drive this in harder, you'll see how slew starts to make a big difference here in the sound. Just thought it would be worth kind of showing you that quickly. But now this is going to make things quite a bit more interesting with the ring modulation. And I can then go into post, save myself a little bit here with a high pass filter, add on a reverb, add on a chorus, and we can then listen to it like so. So let's go back and decrease this scaling so we can see sort of the analyzer here. You could even go in here again, use one of like the new modulators and take this even further. But that's the basics of the ring mod and of the ring mod that we have built in here to Bitwig Studio. You could obviously go in, and if we were using the oscillator source, which is more of like a saw wave, we don't really need much distortion at all on this. We could change this in real time. You can hear all the cool sort of sounds you can get with it. But we would have to kind of set that up to move manually. It's not going to react to our signal at all. And that's really what the TreeMonster does. The TreeMonster is really the core part of this. And we're going to set it up so that it acts just as a regular ring modulator at the beginning. But at its core, it's a pitch detector. And then that determines where the ring modulator point is. Right? So is it 220? Is it 440? Is it 660? Or is it something else entirely? And there's a lot of variation you can get out of that. But again, as we'll see in just a few minutes, I think really the positive of this is that we have wet effects that could only go onto the TreeMonster. That's what makes it very usable and very cool, especially when you have more complex sounds going in. This is going to sound a little bit crazy, but right now I have no idea what the ring modulation point is going to be. If I press play with TreeMonster turned on, with the settings how I have them set up, I don't know what it's using as the source frequency. It's whatever like the last thing it heard was. And maybe that's going to be 220, maybe it's going to be 440, maybe it's going to be 880. I have no idea, but for now, let's just play it and see. Okay, here we, yeah, perfect example right here. If I go up here and pause it, we can see that this is playing 220 over and over again. But I was in there and I was going ham with the frequency control. Do people still use that expression? I don't think they do. But I was going in there and I was turning the frequency a lot. And so I probably got down to something very low because this should be starting at 220. And we can see that our two spikes are coming like just above that. So it's almost like 40 was the last thing that was detected. But I can change that detection when I bring the threshold down and the signal crosses that threshold. So just to explain that, and you'll see this here immediately, when I play it in now, it's adjusting, and that's what that speed was doing. And so now what it's hearing, the last thing it's heard is 220, okay? And let's bring this back on to normal. And what we're going to see is now when I bring the threshold all the way back up, the rate is going to be 220. That's what's setting the depth. And so it's going to stay the same here over and over again. Let me get it to do it again. There we go. Okay, and that's not going to change. If I go and I bring this on here, it's going to stay static at 220. Okay? And in this example, speed isn't going to make any kind of difference at all. Speed has everything to do with crossing the threshold. All right, so let me explain that in better terms. If I bring the threshold all the way down again, okay, it's going to hear the 220, and now with speed, it's going to be jumping around a little bit. And what do you notice is going on here? Where is it jumping to is the question I'd ask you, okay? And I just want you to watch this and think about it, because this is really a thinking man's device, at least at the start. And let's speed things up and do this again. So this is all in the movement, and what it's actually doing is, because the threshold is so low, every time a new note is triggering, that is the pitch that it's detecting. So it's doing 220, then it's doing 440, then it's doing 880, back to 440. And I can show you that because when we get to 440, what we should expect is that we see a peak at 880, and again, an attempt to bring a peak up at 0. And just a reminder, we're at 100% here. So just to show you, okay, here we go. Okay, so let's see. Is this what I got? 880 roughly, right? It's 880 exactly. And again, attempting 0. So what's the trick to this really? Well, the trick is to have it kind of jumping above and below at certain points. That's how you get all of your variation. We can also go in with the pitch and offset this. And it's offsetting it by pitch instead of frequency, but you can think of it in the same way. So right now with how things are setting up, each time it's jumping around, it's doing so based on that exact pitch, which is why you see the peak at 880 and the peak at 0. If I bring this up by 12, okay, and we play this back, and we bring this back on, we're going to see something very different. So let's check and see. Where are our spikes? Here would be the question. Because we've now bumped the pitch by 12, and that's for the detection circuit, specifically for the detection circuit. That's what this is all about, pitch detection. So before it was 220, but now it's bumped it up to 440, but it's still keeping the distance at 220. Kind of confusing, right? But 440, we now have something at 660. And we have something down here at 220, all right? And if I was to bring this up by 24, the distance would still be 220 on the first one. And okay, this is where we'll really start to, we'll leave it at 12 actually, just so you can see the difference when it jumps to the different locations. This thing is so annoying. Okay, there we go. Let's do it again. Pause it in here. Okay, so now it's bumped the pitch again on the detection circuit up. So our starting point is now 880, but the difference is going to be the same as what it's detected, which is 440. All right, and so 440 up is going to be like 1 point, what should it be? My math is so bad. 880 plus 440, that's whatever this is. 880 minus 440 is whatever this spot is here, which I guess would be 440. I apologize, guys. My math, it's terrible now. Once I got out of school, I've completely abandoned all math entirely. But it's useful to know a little bit for following along with what's happening here. And if we bring back in our mix control, you'll really start to see this and I think understand it a little bit better. Especially if we go to... So let's watch it again. Let's go up by 24. Okay, and then if you want to see what's tracking, if you want to see where it's tracking and putting the center point at, because right now we're not seeing the center point pop up for what's determining the plus or minus, you can bring back the ring amount and you'll start to get a sine wave at that point. Okay, so now as I put the mix to 100% and I play through this, let's go back to 12 so that's not so ringy. And I'm going to bring it back out the ring a little bit. You're going to see a sine wave start to pop up in the middle of between that sum and that difference. So are you really going to be bringing in the sine wave when you use this effect? You can, but it sounds a little bit weird. Like, why is there this sine wave that's popped up? Especially if you go anywhere down here, it's just a piercing sine wave. But this is kind of showing you... I guess I'll just do it first. This is showing you the pitch tracking with a sine wave if we were to bring it in. Okay, so we can see where it's bringing it up. This is the original in blue versus what's being detected here and outputting in purple. Okay, and here speed also does make a difference. If you put the speed up, you actually start to get something that's almost like, you know, like an amplitude modulation or like a frequency modulation. You can see all the additional spikes. If we bring the speed right down, it becomes more of just that sine wave jumping around to our different locations. All right, then when we start to bring in the ring amount, now you're starting to see that relationship, and we can then bring back in some of the original signal. And now the crossover is very interesting, the way that this will sound, even with just sine waves. Here's some of those overtones. So it's pretty cool, but the trick to this is actually getting the threshold to kind of jump up and down at different points if you have a really amplitude-rich variation sort of sound coming in here, something that has quite an extreme dynamic range to it. And that's what we'll look at with more of our practical example. The last thing worth showing you are these filters. These are not just post and pre filters. It's not like, oh, I can filter the results of the ring modulation. No, this is all about pitch detection again. All right, so let's just go and like reset this thing up, and I'll show it to you with just this static example here with the same pitch over and over. Let's just lock this thing in here. Again, I'll probably go actually 12 just because it's a little bit easier. Bring our speed right down so we can get the right result here. Just ring modulation, please. Thank you. Good, so that should remain static going across. Right now, if I mess with these filters, nothing is going to happen because we're not re-triggering the pitch detection. The way you re-trigger pitch detection is when it, falls below and comes back above threshold. At this point, it's impossible for it to come back above threshold based on how I have this set up. So if I use these filters, nothing is going to happen. But watch what happens with the detection. This is going to be crazy. We can basically force this into a different range. And this is really odd because at this point, there must be some very little bit of high end in the signal that it's picking up on and making this possible. And it's jumping around here. And if I was to stop it again and put the threshold all the way up, whatever that most recent value was, that's what it's going to consistently do all the way across the board. Each time it's starting and restarting, you can see that we're getting a slightly different value, but now that value will be consistent. And if I bring it in here, it's still going to follow the main pitch, but it's going to keep that the same. So cool. So cool, right? And so it's all about finding the interesting spot in the signal that you want the pitch to be detecting to, because you can really aggressively like limit the range, and I can show you that here. And then obviously though, as the pitch is changing, it may widen or it may shorten out. Let's just do one more so you can see it, and hopefully this is making sense to you. I know it's kind of confusing. So let's force it here. All right, that's where we're going to force that. And now again, be more interesting in the actual thing. And now once it's detected it, it doesn't matter what we do with these can be switched all the way back. It makes no difference because we're not using the detection circuit. So I don't know the best way to really describe this effect. It's interesting. It's really interesting. It's super unique. I don't think I've ever come across something like this before. And for me, that's a good thing because I'm always complaining like, oh, how many more EQs do we need? How many more compressors do we need? And it seems like, for everybody, it's an unlimited amount. Like they can never get enough. For me, these are the things that I love. Something brand new, trying to figure out how to really use it. And the strength of this is to work with the strength of Bitwig and to combine things together, because this is an example where modulating or automating the threshold control makes a lot of sense. You could do it at a different rate to what you're modulating the filter at, right? And even then modulating something like speed as well, and you're going to get really wacky results, even if it's just the same pitch repeating over and over and over again. And so I wasn't planning to do this, but I'll pause the video. I'll just set that up so you can see it and hear what it's doing, right? Like you're never encouraged to automate or modulate the threshold control on like a dynamics device, like a compressor. That was one of the things I was told, absolutely never do. when you think about it, there are some applications where it could be useful on some signals to automate threshold on a compressor. But with this instrument, it's all about modulating this, because this is what's going to set when the instrument re-attempts to detect pitch. And so every time it redetects pitch, it totally changes around what's going on with the sum and difference of the ring modulator. And I know that doesn't make a ton of sense, but it will certainly sound cool, and it's going to sound really cool when we put this into context on an actual part. Just a quick little tidbit for everybody. If you ever want to like have a modulator turning off, like you don't want it constantly running, you can use option A to deactivate it. Just something to be aware of, and you can select all of them at the same time and do that. So in this example, let's go in here and just start with this first one and listen to what's going on here. The one thing I don't have modulating is the speed parameter, so that's something I could change myself. We'll just listen with this first LFO. Remember, we could even bring in a little bit of that sine if we wanted. Maybe also bring back a little bit of the originals, so we can get all those crossovers happening. All right, let's bring in this one. And then let's bring in our last one. Oh, I guess I did have that one in the whole time. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. And then if I was to go in and have a much more complex patch inside of Serum, get some very different results. Let's just use a couple presets. And one thing you will notice about this effect is that it does take a stereo signal and it converts it into mono. Right, you can hear that. I think that has to do with the fact that there's a good chance it's going to end up like going into really low ranges here, just based on how ring modulators work. So you can always go into the wet effects and you can add more to that. So you could use like a multi-band effects. Oh man, this thing's going out of control. Let me just speed it up so that it goes away. You can always still go in. You can use a multi-band effects and then sort of bring some stereo-ness back into the high end. And so I'll just show you that really quickly. All right, so here we go. This is just a really quick example. I've put the multi-band effects 2 just onto the TreeMonster, so we'll be able to listen to this full-blown here first. And so you could really imagine setting up a few of these things to be like remote controls, or using a macro if we were to group the whole thing together and have just like a couple of knobs. That would make a huge difference to the sound. But when we use this in subtle ways, it's like a really cool sort of texture to go in with the original. So let's do that next. if that last example wasn't exciting enough for you, let's do one more. This is how the TreeMonster comes in by default. And I think that's really what's going to deter a lot of people from using it. I personally don't think this is the way it should be brought up by default, because it just is going to sound like sheer chaos. Because most signals with where this threshold is set, it's going to be jumping up and down quite a bit. And so it's just going to sound like a bunch of like blah, 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 all over the place. Even just the speed going down helps us tremendously. And so let's just work with this, and you'll see right off the bat that the detection is pretty good. If we bring the threshold all the way down here, we bring speed to be relatively low, and we just use the sine wave, we open up the filters, we'll see that the detection is pretty much spot on, following the signal as it goes up and then eventually comes back down. So it's doing a good job there. But what I would maybe want to do in this example is force it to just work with some stuff in the low end, okay? And I'm okay with it maybe moving a little bit, but I don't want it doing that too much. I don't want it redetecting pitch that often. Maybe just have it redetect pitch in this moment where it goes to like silence, because you can hear that I do have a fairly extreme dynamic range here, and extreme's not the right word, but varied. At this moment here, it gets very quiet. And the cool thing is we could even go in here and chop something out. And by chopping something out, we force it into silence. And by forcing it into silence, that would mean that, you know, it's going to have to redetect pitch no matter what. All right, so let's just check this out real quick. Just listen to it first. And then I'm going to mess with the TreeMonster and try to get something in here. So I can have a threshold probably on this level maybe. Let's try this. Okay, that's probably what I want. Maybe I'll mess with the pitch first, just to hear it. That's kind of cool. Re-trigger a little bit more. This is kind of cool. If I go minus 24. And then from here, what I would do is go in, add some wet effects, and try to get kind of like a nice balance, something that's going to work well with this signal. So that's what I'm going to do here. Pause the video, come back, and hopefully we'll have something really interesting. The one thing I would consider doing as well would be moving these filters almost together, having them go up. So let's actually just do that really quick so you can see how I'm thinking about this. Have them go up together. Kind of an interesting way. Just listen to it first. Might be a little bit too far. Okay, that might work really well. And now let's go and add some effects, and we'll come back and see what I'm able to come up with. So here's just one really quick and simple example that you can follow. I've added in the multi-band effects because we know that this is the TreeMonster. It's a mono effect. It's going to take a stereo signal, convert it to mono. So I'm going to bring some stereoness back in using chorus, using reverb, using kind of more of like a ping-pongy type delay in here. And then I've automated some controls in the TreeMonster, the pitch, and also the speed. And then we have control over the mix amount. So let's take a listen to it and maybe adjust the pitch a little bit and just sort of listen to what we're able to come up with. Now, you may prefer the version without, but when you're going for more of like a dark industrial kind of sound, nothing like pure pop, right? Like this probably wouldn't be appropriate there, but for something dark, something industrial, this would work great to take maybe your more plastic sounding synths and put them into a totally more mechanical and gritty sort of world. So enough adjectives, let's just listen. Bringing some of that sine wave, why not? It may be cool to just bring that in at that last moment. Do that one more time. So there you have it, the TreeMonster. Definitely one to experiment with. Don't shy away from it. You don't even really have to understand what's going on, but you will need to spend some time kind of tinkering, finding sweet spots, and going from there. So like always, I'm so excited when I see a new sort of effect, and I have to really kind of go from sheer scratch to try and figure it out. It took some time, but I'm happy I spent the time, and I hope that you've learned something new in this video. Thank you so much, and until the next time, really have a good one. And yeah, keep making that music. Can't wait to hear what you do with this effect, because there's a ton of potential, especially when you combine it with all of the other Bitwig devices and some of the unique things that this program is capable of. Thanks a lot.